How could the Ottoman state not witness the fall of Andalusia and not extend a helping hand to it? The Moriscos had high hopes based on the Ottomans. The first distress call to reach the Ottomans was during the time of Mehmed the Conqueror, and Mehmed the Conqueror didn't try to do anything. This opens another file. He knew that Andalusia was falling and that distress calls were arriving, yet he still sent a naval raid. Selim was in no attempt to save Andalusia. Selim supported, politically and financially, the naval resistance groups on the coasts of Tunisia and Algeria when they emerged. So, where was the Ottoman state in Andalusia? It was Grenada. A whole Andalusia file is from the time of Sultan Ahmed. Why didn't the Mamluks act? For example, where were the Ottomans? They were killing the Safavids. Oh, we have another problem. Yes, if the Safavid state hadn't emerged, it would have been possible for the Ottomans to do something for Andalusia. A group that condemns the Ottomans for not saving Andalusia glorifies the current rulers who don't support Palestine, even though it's close to them. Well, what about it? The Ottomans had their own problems that distracted them from Andalusia. Why are you asking the current leaders to support Gaza when they have their own troubles, alliances, and problems? No, I want to say that's not true. Music, peace be upon you, my brothers, wherever you are. Welcome to a new episode of the 100 Questions in History series. This is the series through which we always answer the pressing questions that our great and vast Islamic history has faced. Where have we reached for those who have recently joined us? We have reached the 8th axis, a very important axis. Yes, it is important because its impact still lives with us. It is the axis of the Ottoman state. So, in which episode? We have reached the 5th episode. So, welcome to everyone who has joined us. And as usual, it is not right or appropriate to begin this episode without welcoming our regular guest, Professor Muhammad Al-Harmi. Welcome, Professor Muhammad. May God bless you. Abu Al-Harith, how are you? May God bless you and elevate your status. May God protect you, Professor Muhammad. We are still in the Ottoman Empire. Yes, it's long and rich history, and we've reached question 75, Professor Muhammad. But you know, before I ask you this question, some of us are just sitting around on social media, Professor Muhammad, scrolling through things. So, as soon as we see material about the Ottomans, we get a stomach ache. And without thinking, as usual, our minds jump straight to what we've learned on social media. Then they start saying things like, what more do you want? More betrayal, more treachery, more despicable than that. A message from Andalusia, pleading for help, reached the great leader Muhammad al-Fatih, and he just abandoned them to their fate, offering them nothing. He was the greatest leader of his time. What more betrayal could you ask for? And then, you're studying the history of the Ottoman Empire, a history full of betrayals and conspiracies, the very reason for the destruction of our nation. The Ottoman Empire, no doubt, didn't save the people of Andalusia from the Christian kingdoms. I mean, how is that, Professor Muhammad? And so, of course, he doesn't want to understand the Andalusian situation or the Ottoman situation at that time. And then he might say, yeah, okay, so Muhammad the Conqueror couldn't save it, sir. And where was Yazid Roman II? Okay, sir, Yazid Roman II couldn't save it. And where was Selim? Okay, sir, Selim didn't succeed. Suleiman the Magnificent, in his time, had a terrifying and fearsome navy. Why didn't he reclaim Andalusia? Because it was already gone. And so, Professor Muhammad, question number 75 in this episode asks, how could the Ottoman state, at the height of its power, not save Andalusia from falling? How could it watch the fall of Andalusia and not extend a helping hand to rescue the Andalusians who were being slaughtered? Wouldn't it have been better for the Ottoman state, instead of going to conquer Europe, to go and save Andalusia, rescue its people, and preserve their rule? Yes, Professor Muhammad. I am with you on the matter, God willing. May God bless you, Abu al-Harith. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. Praise be to God, and peace and blessings be upon the messenger of God, his family, his companions, and those who follow him. Look, your introductions always inspire me to find ways to answer. By the way, yes, I commend you for them. May God protect you. Yes, I mean, one of the problems of our time is the social media mentality, which is the mentality of taking and rushing to embrace information without researching or investigating it. Look, let me just start with a simple recommendation for myself and my brothers. Any scientific topic in general, any scientific topic, whether in religion, history, or even pure sciences, a person has two options. Either you go to someone whose knowledge and religion you trust and learn from them, a trustworthy person in both knowledge and religion, and you learn from them with peace of mind. In that case, you are called, in the terminology of the jurists, a follower or a layman, which is like when you go to ask a sheikh, or it's like when you go to a doctor. What matters to you in a doctor is that he is knowledgeable and trustworthy together. Okay, you wouldn't go to someone trustworthy if you doubted their competence, and you wouldn't go to someone competent if you doubted their integrity. Or are you afraid they'll take advantage of you, exaggerate a small matter, or take money from you for an operation that doesn't warrant it? So, what I mean is, this is the natural and sound approach in all matters. Either you look for someone competent and trustworthy and take from them, and in that case, you're considered an imitator, and what you take from them will save you before God Almighty. Yes, their good deeds are yours, and their bad deeds, if they erred, are their own responsibility. But as a simple person, Professor Muhammad, how do I know if someone is competent and trustworthy? By asking questions, or by observing what you see. I mean, what do you see in terms of signs and characteristics? For example, someone known for hypocrisy, someone known for love, someone known for fickleness and temptation. What if they have good relations with Turkey today, praising the Ottoman Empire, then their policies change and they turn against them? This is hypocrisy and fickleness. Or someone known for loving money, someone known for loving fame. I mean, there are signs that people know well and ask like you would ask about a doctor, and you ask 1, 2, 3, so ask, yes, that's good. Okay, the second thing is, if you're not convinced and you want to get in, then go ahead and rely on God. And what about everyone you heard information from? Go look it up in the books. Sometimes there's forgery and the speaker relies on the listener's laziness, saying, so-and-so said, in such and such book, on such and such page, such and such. Look at the confidence I'm speaking with. And in the end, you go and look at such and such page and you don't find that statement, or you find the opposite. Of course, it happens, but why does it happen? Because the person speaking is relying on the laziness of the viewer who won't bother to check their facts. You're currently one of two things: either you intend to be ignorant and imitative, in which case you should seek out a competent and trustworthy person, or you genuinely want to engage with a topic and discuss it. Don't let anyone's words slip by without investigating and verifying them. Knowledge is often not found on social media. It's found in books. So, whoever wants to enter this field will delve into books and put their trust in God. This is a matter of faith, because through it, you will be safe. Your worldly life and your faith will be safe. Yes, because we said before that God Almighty divided the believers into 3 categories: the Muhajiran immigrants, the Ansar helpers, and those who came after them. They say, "Our Lord, forgive us and our brothers who preceded us in faith, and put not in our hearts any resentment toward those who have believed." So, you are now faced with a situation similar to that of the Ottoman Empire. It had neither Muhajiran nor Ansar, but people who preceded us in faith. They had problems, they had flaws, they had mistakes. So, acknowledge these flaws and these mistakes, but don't deny the essence of faith-based love and the essence of faith-based brotherhood are complete. So, if you're going to take information from social media, Meteor, it's when you hear the information and then, right? Yes, because this increases the rift, increases superficiality, increases shallowness. That's right indeed. So, the most dangerous thing is that when someone hears about the Ottomans, they just stick to these two pieces of information they memorized from Abu Ahmad and Abu Carlo and write them down on social media as if they're something Muslim. That's the disaster that people are also passing around. So, you need to prove, you who believe that if a wicked person comes to you with news, investigate it thoroughly, lest you harm people out of ignorance and then become regretful for what you have done. Regret, of course, in the hereafter, though regret may also occur in this world. Now, the Ottoman Empire, we mentioned in the first episode that it was the Ottoman Empire because it has contemporary extensions, so there are many suspicions surrounding it, and the distortion of it is even greater. For example, the question you asked, the one about Andalusia, I personally am a follower of history, or rather, a researcher of history, and I follow what is happening in reality. I thought for a moment that this suspicion had ended and no longer existed in the current context, but in truth, I was surprised to find while researching that this suspicion was being reproduced, especially in the period before 2002, when Arab Gulf relations and Turkish relations were extremely bad. I found waves upon waves of people repeating this topic, including the one I'm telling you about, the one who comes out and says, so-and-so said this in such and such book, and Kar Aldin Barbarossa is mentioned in the book in his memoirs and he said such and such. But when you open Kar Aldin Barbarossa's memoirs, you find nothing of the sort. There's the opposite. Glory be to God. Yes, yes. Anyway, now, sir, the issue of the Ottoman state and Andalusia is a matter that requires us to one of the very amusing and interesting things is that the group who are criticizing the Ottomans for not saving Andalusia, I don't want to say most of them, I want to say all of them, as far as I've seen, praise the current rulers who don't support Palestine, even though it's close to them. They're all hypocrites to the current regimes, and Palestine is right there with them. Yet no one is supporting it. Everyone is calling themselves a leader, a strong and revered leader, and what happened happened thanks to His Highness the Prince, His Highness the King, and His Excellency the President, and they're going to hold the Ottomans accountable for not saving Andalusia, which is the furthest point from them, the furthest point from Europe. Yes, when did this suspicion arise so that we can? What I find, Abu al-Harith, is that during the period of distortion of the Ottoman state during the time of the British and French at the beginning of the century, many people might be surprised to find someone like Abd al-Rahman al-Kawakibi in his book al-Quran who accused Muhammad al-Fatih of this heinous charge. He accused Muhammad al-Fatih of entering into an alliance with the Spanish whereby they would let Constantinople fall in exchange for him letting them take Andalusia. Yes, this is what Abd al-Rahman al-Kawakibi mentioned. Look, Abd al-Rahman al-Kawakibi was a person who was very hostile towards the Ottomans. He lived during the period of Sultan Abdul Hamid, and Sultan Abdul Hamid at that time was a Red Sultan and the despotic Sultan. I want to say that Abdul Hamid is responsible for some of these matters. We can come to Abdul Hamid another time, God willing, but you can imagine that every virtue of the Ottomans was taken away from them during that era. Even the conquest of Constantinople, which was a great good news, there were those who took this conquest away from them and said that it was part of a conspiracy that took place with the Spanish. Of course, this a purely historical era that doesn't need to be discussed at all, because before, during the period when Muhammad the Conqueror conquered Constantinople, Spain didn't yet exist. It wasn't Argentinian, and it wasn't a nursery that was unified, nor did Ferdinand marry Isabella. There wasn't even a conquest of Constantinople in 1433, nor the fall of Granada in 1492, meaning a difference of 40 years. Yes, so this agreement couldn't have happened at all. Later, such doubts were renewed in the era of Arab nationalism, and it's true that one of the reasons who said this was someone named Muhammad Jamal Biham, a professor of Ottoman history who has a book called The Philosophy of Ottoman History. He is considered one of the moderate voices at that time, with the Ottomans, and one of those whom I consider my role model in writing, authorship, and thought. Professor Muhammad Jalal Kishk, may God have mercy on him, wrote that. But why are they excused? Because at that time no documents have been published showing what the Ottomans did in saving Andalusia. This part was indeed dark, and there was no information about it, because the Ottoman archives remained closed and not open to researchers, and the translation movement from Spanish and French was limited. So when did this topic begin to appear and become clear? We can say that one of the pioneers of these studies is someone like Dr. Abdel Jalal Tamimi. He's a Tunisian historian, and by the way, he's an Arab nationalist, meaning he's not an Islamist. This man began translating documents from the Inquisition from Spanish and French. At the same time, he had connections here in Turkey, and the archives of the Turkish Prime Ministry were opened to him. He found documents that no one had seen before. He's also fluent in Old Turkish, which is Ottoman Turkish. God bless him. Abdel Jalal Tamimi is probably over 80 now, or thereabouts. I met him, learned from him, and read some of his books here. I'm telling you, he's not an Islamist, just so you don't associate him with the Ottomans, but he's a man interested in the history of the Moriscos. Some people call him the father of Morisco studies. This man began publishing documents that prove the Ottoman state's intervention to save the Andalusians before the fall of Granada up to the time of the final expulsion, which was during the reign of Philip Roman III. This final expulsion decree was in 1609, at the beginning of the 7th century. In parallel with Abdel Jalal al-Tamimi's efforts, Turkey began opening its archives, especially after Erdogan came to power. A number of researchers began producing studies, and simultaneously, the translation movement in Egypt flourished at the National Center for Translation. We had a second generation. Remember when we talked about the sources of independent states, we said that there was a pioneering class of Egyptian historians. This second generation, the generation of their students and their students, those who studied in Spain or became fluent in Spanish, began translating books by Spanish Orientalists who wrote about the Moriscos. So, in Cairo, at the National Center for Translation, we have a number of books written by Spanish Orientalists translated into Arabic. Among the famous names is Dr. Gamal Abdel Rahman in Egypt. He either translated himself or supervised, reviewed, or introduced studies translated by researchers interested in the Moriscos. So, a wave emerged, let's say about 30 or 40 years ago, but no more than that, about 30 or 40 years ago. New information has begun to emerge on this subject, information that was previously unavailable. Most of this information consists of documents, either from the Inquisition, Turkish documents, or studies by Spanish and French Orientalists. These documents reveal the relationship between the Ottomans and the people of Andalusia and their communication. The final conclusion is that the Ottomans did everything in their power to support Andalusia. This is the final conclusion. No one, after reading these documents and studies, can say that the Ottomans fell short in supporting the people of Andalusia. No one can. Now I'll get to the story, but I wanted to tell you that the history of the incident is very important. I wanted to talk about the history of the incident and what was revealed about it. So, what do you think about starting with two very important periods? The Ottoman state was founded in 1299, so let's say 1300, and Andalusia fell in 1492. During whose reign did Andalusia fall? During the reign of which Ottoman Sultan? It was during the reign of Sultan Bayezid Roman II, the son of Mehmed the Conqueror. So, during the reign of the son of Mehmed the Conqueror. Okay, first a distress message reached the Ottomans during the time of Mehmed the Conqueror. Yes, before the fall of Andalusia. Before the fall of Andalusia, because the movement had begun, as we might say, sending them to the Maghreb as soon as they could. At that time, Morocco had the Wattasid dynasty, Algeria had the Zaynid dynasty, and Tunisia had the Hafsid dynasty. Then came the Mamluk dynasty, and then the Ottoman Empire. So, the first message arrived during the time of Mehmed the Conqueror. Now, the Wattasid dynasty, Professor Muhammad, was also under the rule of the Sardi dynasty, right? No, before. Yes, the Sardis would come and inherit the Wattasid dynasty. So, if what we want is for people to see that we're discussing a similar issue, people should go back and examine the historical records to see if the Ottomans were capable or not. Of course, the topic we're discussing will lead us to quickly review these periods, specifically the reign of the conqueror Yazid, Selim, and Suleiman. We talked about the Ottoman state when it was founded, when it fell, the first message that reached the conqueror, the entire Andalusian file, and who ended it. Beautiful, right? Excellent question. The fall of the state was in 1400-1920. Okay, good. We can say that it marked the end of the Moriscos file, which is the file of the persecuted Andalusian Muslims. Its practical end was in 1609. Yes, 1609, the final expulsion. Yes, that was the final expulsion decree, which was during the reign of Philip Roman III of Spain. And in our case, it was during the reign of Sultan Ahmed, the one who owns the mosque, which is ours. This is Sultan Ahmed I. Yes. So, we're now approximately so this story took 120 years, meaning it took 8 years from the 15th century AD, 9 years from the 17th century AD, and the whole of the 16th century AD. What is that? Yes, so our story is with Andalusia. Oh, excuse me, my problem is I keep remembering your explanation. So, when the Ottoman state was founded, when the Ottoman state emerged, where was Andalusia? What was left of Andalusia? I mean, Granada was a kingdom. It was the kingdom of Granada, but of course, it was a bit larger than what it ended up being. Yes, I mean, when we talked Abu al-Haris in the episode about Andalusia, we said that the fall of Andalusia can be called 3 stages. One stage happened with the Tafur kings, which ended with the capture of Toledo. This stage was stopped by Yusuf ibn Tashin when he came with the Almoravids and fought the Battle of Talarqa. After that, Andalusia became part of the Maghreb states. First the Almoravid state, and then the Almohad state came. They supported Andalusia, half of Andalusia, half of the Iberian Peninsula. They supported it like that, until the Battle of Las Nervas de Tolosa during the Almohad Caliphate. This battle led to the collapse of the Almohad state. There was no strong state in Morocco comparable to it, so Andalusia seceded. And here at that time, from 626 to 636 to 646 to 656, and so on, the major cities of Andalusia fell: Cordoba, Seville, Badajoz, and Murcia. The Muslims were confined to the kingdom of Granada. Okay, beautiful. Yes, beautiful. Here, the seed of the Ottoman state was formed, or rather, it began to sprout. The Ottoman state was still forming around Eskişehir, and it was still seeing what the world was opening up for it. Of course, guys, please excuse me, because I'm just trying to work with Professor Muhammad to draw a chronological and geographical map so we can make a good introduction. It's really important, and I commend this and ask you to elaborate further. May God reward you. Okay, sir, now we'll start by saying that the Andalusians sent messages to everyone, including the Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih. Okay, why? Look, even here's a good point. I mean, neither the Hafsids, nor the Zaynids, nor the Wattasids, nor the Mamluks could save them. So why are you coming now and focusing on the Ottomans? Well, that's a good point, and it didn't occur to me. For example, I'm telling you that history is used as a contemporary political tool, not and by the way, you'll also ask me about the Hajj, like I told you. Why didn't the Ottoman sultans perform it? Well, you have the Zaynids, the Hafsids, the Wattasids, and the Mamluks, and no one performed Hajj either. Yes, but as I told you, we said that Hunayd of Hungary hindered him. Even though it's true that he was defeated and killed, Muhammad al-Fatih was unable to conquer Belgorod here, and we also said that the man named Iskandar Pasha the Albanian also caused a great delay. Yes, to the point that we, at the very end of the story of the conqueror, reached the point of occupation, or rather, the conquest, or the control of a part of the eastern Italian coast, and then maimed the conqueror died. Now, my friend, there is one more I haven't mentioned. There is another one who was in the east, who was like those two. This man was named Hassan the Tall, or they call him Hassan in Turkish, meaning tall. This man was in the east, and although general history has moved on from him, you won't find many who know him. This man was the emir of a principality called the White Sheep Emirate, the al-andalus. He was a Sunni man, and this Turkmen tribe split into Sunni and Shia. So the Sunni group became known as the al-andalus, who are the white sheep, and the Shia group became known as the Tareekhna Emirate, who are the black sheep. Where is this geography? In eastern Turkey, on the border between two Ki in the current Iran is closer to the Turkish situation, and Zun Hassan was an ambitious man. So what was he playing at? He is occupying empty spaces and wants to establish a kingdom for himself. We said that the Ottoman Empire's main focus was on the west and conquering European lands, but it was always under attack from the east. This attack from the east came sometimes from the powerful Turkmen Emirates, either because they engaged in conflicts and expanded at the expense of the Ottoman Empire, or because it was Timur who brought about this conflict, since he entered into a power struggle with one of these emirates. The important thing is that Zun Hassan was one of the strongest and most ambitious of these emirates. He expanded eastward until he controlled Iraq and Persia, and then he entered the Ottoman-Mamluk conflict. So what did he do? He expanded towards the Ottomans and sent a message to the Mamluk Sultan saying, "I am your Sultan, and I will conquer this land in your name." Of course, the Mamluk Sultan in Egypt was welcome, and we shouldn't forget that he was also afraid of Ottoman expansion. Just as you have a current situation in the Arab world that fears the rise of Turkey and its impact on the balance of power. The man who was sitting in possession of the caliphate, this sultan who had the Abbasid Caliph in Cairo, and who was the leader of the Islamic world, the Ottomans' victories were indeed strong victories, but they also affected his position and diminished his status, especially when one state was on the rise and another state was in decline. The Ottomans were on the rise, the Mamluks were in decline, so Zun Hassan put himself in this position between the Ottomans and the Mamluks. He expanded with the Ottomans, and then Muhammad al-Fatih came and pursued him until Muhammad al-Fatih was finally able to defeat him. But when Muhammad al-Fatih defeated him, this was the beginning of the tension in Mamluk-Ottoman relations, because he was considered to have defeated someone who was affiliated with whom a Mamluk sultan at that time was named Kate Bey. Yes, by the way, this is important for the next episode as well. Yes, that's right. This is the beginning of the tensions between the Mamluks and the Ottomans, and this affects our story that we are telling now. Well, Zun Hassan will leave. He will not die alone like this. He will leave us a branch and a very dangerous seed, and that is Hassan, the daughter of you, who will marry someone named Haydar. Haydar is a central figure. Haydar is the one who transformed the Safavid movement from a Shiite religious sect into a political entity seeking a state. When his daughter married Haydar, even though he was Shiite and he was Sunni, they gave birth to Shah Ismail Safavi, the founder of the Safavid state. God help us. Oh, this is where the disaster started. We haven't had any Safavids here yet. Iran is entirely Sunni. It used to be entirely Sunni, or rather, there are Shiite areas in Iraq, Persia, and Lebanon, but Iran is Sunni. Yes, origin is Turkish.
يعني الصفويين أتراك مش فرس.
Safavids were Turks, not Persians. Yes, and this is a problem for those who say it's about the Persians and the Shiites. When they Shiitized Iran, they didn't do it through Persian efforts. They did it through Arab efforts, because they used Shiite scholars from the Levant, Jebel Amal and Lebanon. You were making us not know Professor Muhammad. You were making us stick to what we already know. So, now they're telling you, yeah, you see, you're exaggerating. Yes, okay, I'm just joking. But what happened to us now, what concerns us now is the story of Andalusia. The story of Andalusia began with Muhammad al-Fatih and then his son Yazid, who, through Azan Hassan, created two tensions, one with the Mamluks and the other with the Safavid state, which was to emerge in the eastern part northwest of present-day Iran, which is now the eastern part of Anatolia. These two dangers, we can say, were the two main threats that prevented the Ottoman Empire from expanding westward and kept it occupied for at least half a century. There are details to consider regarding its westward expansion. So what happened? We have Muhammad al-Fatih. Let's say Muhammad al-Fatih died before conquering the island of Rhodes. Rhodes, not Cyprus, of course. Anyone who looks at our map will see it. Consider it in the heart of Anatolia, the Ottoman Empire, which was expanding in Anatolia, and the Balkans had a place called the island of Rhodes. This island was a refuge for knights, remnants of the Crusades, a group that the Mamluks expelled and cleansed of the Levantine coast gathered here. In Rhodes, it was a very fortified island that Maimed the Conqueror couldn't conquer. Yes, exactly. So, Maimed the Conqueror was stalled at Rhodes and at Belgrade, just so you can see the borders of the Ottoman Empire and how far it could go. Greece was with us at that time. Greece was with us, but Greece has many islands in the sea, which is what they call the Aegean Sea. These islands had centers belonging to Venice. Venice, we said in the last episode, I think, was a global superpower at that time, and most of its power was naval power, meaning its fleet was a world-class fleet because it was a country dependent on the sea and maritime trade. So it had centers on these islands, and it had centers in the Black Sea and centers in the Eastern Mediterranean. All of these centers are considered to have been liberated by the conqueror, except for some centers that are still in the Aegean Sea. But just so you can imagine how far the Ottomans had reached, I mean the Ottomans at that time, Muhammad al-Fatih reached this region and died in 1481, meaning 11 or 12 years before the fall of Granada in Andalusia. So, the borders of the Ottoman Empire were vast. Geographically speaking, we were in Constantinople, and Andalusia was way over there, at the ends of the earth. Yes, we're talking about Constantinople, a huge distance. If you're saying the Ottoman Empire could send a land army to protect Andalusia from falling, well, this land army had two routes, one that would traverse all of Europe, reaching Spain from the north, and another that would cross all of Central Europe, including Germany and France, and then enter Spain from the north. So, would it fight all the nations of Europe? We couldn't even conquer Belgrade, and even within our borders, it would pass through them like that. Of course, I'm telling you, all of Central Europe it would mean fighting all the Europeans. until he reaches the land, if he is Muhammad al-Fatih himself. Yes, if Muhammad al-Fatih himself is unable to conquer with locusts, how do you expect him to cross all of that? Well, the second land route is for him to go around, take Anatolia, go down to the Levant, continue to Egypt, and cross all of North Africa. Well, all of these countries have enemies, or rivals, or at least other countries that do not owe him allegiance, not to mention the Safavid state. I mean, let's leave lands of the Mamluks, which were the second Islamic power, and then penetrate all of North Africa, and then reach Morocco and cross the Strait of Gibraltar. That's a fantasy, frankly. I mean, no one could imagine that. Well, by sea, yes, we have the sea, that's true. Why didn't we go by sea? We do. And have the fleet capable of conquering Rhodes, which is next to us, which is right below us, which is in the heart of the Ottoman state. I mean, we have the Ottoman fleet. Up until the time of Mehmed the Conqueror, the Ottoman fleet wasn't truly a fleet, but rather a significant growth since the days of Bayezid I and then Murad Roman II. However, Mehmed the Conqueror's need for a fleet stemmed from the fact that the Ottoman Empire was more of a land-based empire than a maritime one up to that point. So, where are the ships we used to conquer Constantinople? It's a long story, don't you remember? Didn't we say that those were just a few ships back then, incomparable in number? 4 ships coming from Venice or Genoa were able to overcome 300 small Ottoman vessels blockading the Golden Horn. Yes, the Golden Horn. So, the Ottoman fleet wasn't really a fleet then, because Venice was a powerful naval power, and its fleet, plus the papal fleet, was a large one, and the Ottoman Empire, at best, was only able to protect its borders or conquer nearby cities. Even the island of Rhodes was beyond Mehmed the Conqueror's reach. So, when you imagine the Ottoman power at that time 1492, this Ottoman force was incapable of reaching Andalusia at all. It was incapable of penetrating all of Europe by land, nor was it capable of penetrating the Mediterranean Sea by sea and confronting the large fleets. So, Muhammad al-Fatih didn't try to do anything. What is Muhammad al-Fatih? The documents mention nothing. Oh, keep in mind that Muhammad al-Fatih died 12 years before the fall of Granada, as we said. Okay, but did a message of distress reach him or not? But the first distress was from someone who couldn't provide a means of action, meaning a practical tool or a practical means that might change the situation. So, when did the fall itself happen? What happened with Bayezid Roman II, who is the son of Muhammad al-Fatih? Is that other matters have arisen that prevent Bayezid from providing any assistance. What are these matters that have arisen? Yes, here you go, sir. First, the Ottoman Mamluk War broke out. Yes. Now, what Uzun Hassan did was start a war between the Ottomans and the Mamluks on their borders, specifically in the areas of Adarna and Tarsus, which are still present today. The Ottoman Mamluk War lasted 6 years. 6 years, Granada fell in 1492. This war lasted from 1485 to 1491. So, in the years before the fall of Granada, the two strongest powers in the Islamic world were engaged in a war of nations called the First Ottoman Mamluk War. Okay, why did we enter this war? What necessitated it? Now, let's open another file. First, the Mamluks, as we said, were apprehensive about the rise of Ottoman power. Well, Kansa al-Ghori entered the internal Ottoman conflict because when Mehmed the Conqueror died, he left 2 sons, Bayezid, who assumed the Sultanate, and his other son, Sam,
وأعلن نفسه
Prince
سلطانا.
Sem seized Bursar and declared
وأرسل إلى
himself
بايزيد بيقول
Sultan.
له
Yes, and
أنت إيه
he
رأيك
sent
إحنا
a
نقسم
message to
السلطنة
Bayezid
بيننا،
asking
الجزء
him,
الشرقي بتاع
What do
الأناضول
you
ده وما
think
بعد
we
الدنيا
divided the
تساوي، هل ممكن
Sultanate
نحكمه
between
ولا ناخد
us,
الإيه
the eastern
الجزء
part of
الغربي؟
Anatolia and beyond the
طبعا
Asian
بايزيد
part,
رفض.
meaning I rule
أرسل
it and you
جيشا
take the western
وهزم
part? Of course, he
وهنهزمه،
refused to
فذهب
send
بجيش
an army
بايزيد
that was
وهزم
defeated
أخاه.
by Jam,
وأخوه
so he
انتهى
went with an
إلى
army himself and defeated his
الجزائر،
brother. Where did his brother
والمماليك
flee to?
استقبلوه
He sought
واستقبلوه
refuge with
بحفاوة،
the
ورأوا
Mamluks,
إنه
and they
إيه
welcomed him warmly, seeing it as
يستحق
an
الصعود والنهوض
opportunity
وكمان
to
يمد
influence
يده
the
على خط
Ottoman
السيطرة.
rise and growth.
وبعد ذلك وأمدوه بأسلحة وأمدوه
They supplied
بمساعدات،
him with weapons
لكن
and
جيم فيما بعد هزم مرة أخرى،
aid,
وبعدين
but
ذهب
Sem was
ولجأ
later
إلى
defeated again. He
فرسان
then sought
القديس يوحنا في
refuge
رودس
with the Knights of
وبقي
St.
عندهم،
John in
وبعدين
Rhodes,
لعبوا
where
به
he
هم لمصالحهم.
remained. They,
فلكده
in
قصة
turn,
درامية
manipulated
ظريفة
him for
لطيفة
their own
يعني غير
interests.
مؤسفة
So,
ومحزنة
what's the
يعني،
story?
بس عايز
It's
أقول إيه
a
لما نشوف
dramatic,
كيف لم يكن
amusing,
عثماني
or rather,
صريح
tragic tale. But what
يعني
I mean
منحاز إلى
is,
قوة
when you see
علشان
how the
يهرب
Ottoman prince
إلى
sought
معركة
refuge
أخيه،
with a powerful
ففرسان
force
القديس
to
يوحنا
fight
دول
his
سلموه إلى
brother,
البابوية،
the Knights of
والبابوية
St. John
سلموه
handed
إلى
him over to the
ملك فرنسا، ومات
papacy, who
سنة
then handed him over to the King of
1495
France. He
مسموما
died in
بالأفعى. طيب
1495,
1495
most
وقع
likely
جيش
poisoned.
كان
So, in
يمثل تهديدا
1495,
لبايزيد
Sem posed a
وسلطته
threat
طول هذه الفترة التي شهدت
to
سقوط
Bayezid
غرناطة،
and his
وحتى
authority
انتهت بسقوط
throughout this
غرناطة كيف؟
period, which witnessed the fall of
كإيران،
others. Even 3 years after
داخل
their
في صراع
fall,
مع
Sem
المماليك،
was still embroiled in
والأوروبيين ماسكين
conflict
أخوه.
with the
هنتكلم
Mamluks, while the Europeans held his
400
brother
فرنسا،
captive. Will
ولا نسيب
you
الأمير
pay us
العثماني
400,000 ducats
يغز
every
بقى
year,
يشوف
and we don't
أتباعه
let
ويشوف
the
أنصاره
Ottoman prince
ويهيج عليك
see his
الأمور؟
followers and
فكان
his
جزء من
supporters
الصراع
and stir
السياسي
things up for you?
بين
So,
بايزيد
it was
وبين
part of the
جيم
political
أخوه
conflict
وبينه
between
وبين
Bayezid
المماليك وبينه
and
وبين
his brother
الأوروبيين
Sem, and
هذا
between
الموضوع.
him and the Mamluks, and between
فاحنا
him
عندنا
and the
دولة مشغولة
Europeans.
تماما،
This
يعني
is the
قانونها
subject.
مشغول
So,
جدا
we have a country that is
بهذه
completely busy,
المعارك
meaning its
لإصابة
sultan is very busy with
الناظر
what?
والحفاظ على
With these
سلطانه
battles. At the time when
شوف
Grenada
ربنا
fell, he
تعالى
was
وما
preoccupied
أصابكم
with
من مصيبة
preserving his
فبما
power.
كسبت
Look, God
أيديكم.
Almighty said, and
التفرق والتمرد
whatever of
داخل الصف
misfortune
الإسلامي
befalls
بيساوي
you, it
نتائج
is because
بهيئة
of
جدا،
what your hands have
لكن
earned.
هذا
The
للأسف
division and fragmentation
أمر لا
within the
يفهمه
Islamic
قصير
ranks leads
النظر،
to
لا
very
يفهمه
far-reaching
الحريص على السلطة،
consequences. But
لذلك كانت
unfortunately,
كل
this
المشاكل اللي
is
حصلت دي
something
كانت
that the
نتيجة
short-sighted do
تفرق
not
وتمزق
understand, nor do those eager
جيم
for power,
بايزيد
because
لا
you will
أصغر
see
من
that
عبد
all the
اللطيف.
calamities
نعم
that
لا أصغر
occurred
منه.
were a result of
طيب
Islamic division
ده
and
معنى ذلك
fragmentation.
إنه
So,
بايزيد
is
نفسه
this bigger
حقيقة
than
هو
Yazid or
شخصية
smaller than him? This smaller
شخصية
one.
فاجرة،
Yes,
شخصية
this one
هادئة،
is smaller than
لذلك
him.
يسمونه
Yes,
الصوفي
add to that
ويسمونه
Yazid
التقي
himself.
ويسمونه
In
الولي،
reality, he
لكن
was a
الراجل
rather
كانش
lukewarm or
يعني ما
quiet
كانش بتاع
personality.
جهاد
They
زي
call
ابوه
him a
وزي
Sufi, they
ابي
call him
الدرداء،
pious,
يعني
they
هو
call him
انتفشوا كده
a
بين محمد
saint, but
الفاتح
he wasn't a man of jihad like his father
وبين
and
ابنه
his
سليم
sons after him. He
وياووز
was
اللي هو
squeezed in
يعني
between
ياووز
Muhammad
وياووز كل
al-Fatih,
بحر
a
الأحمر.
brilliant
في
and
الفترة دي
formidable
كان
name,
بايزيد
and
محتاج
his
واحد ايه
son Selim
مهذب
Yavuz,
كده
and
وهادي
Sulayman the
وتقي، لدرجة
Magnificent
انه
after him.
يعني
So,
أرسل
this period,
لبعض الولاة
Yazid's
منهم خيبر
period,
كرم،
was the period of
أرسل
a rather
إليهم يستفسر
lukewarm,
هل
quiet, and
حدث
pious
شيء
man, to the
جعل
point that he
السلطان
sent some the
المعظم يرغب
governors, including
بالجهاد
the Khan
أو
of
بعض
Crimea,
ولاته كان
sent a
متصور
message
إنه
to
إيه
him
إن
inquiring
الراجل ده
whether
خلاص بقى
something
بالجهاد
had happened
مش
that
ماشي حال،
caused the
محدش
Sultan
ماشي
to
حال السيد
close the
جدا.
door of jihad. I
فأرسل
mean,
إليه
some
بايزيد
of his
يقول
governors
إنه
were asking if
يعني
this man
لما
had
السلطان
closed the
بيخرج
door of
الأرض
jihad
بيسوء
if he
أخلاق
wasn't
الناس،
following his
فبالتالي أنا
father's
أحكم
path.
قوم في أمان
So Yazid
واستقرار
sent
أحسن ما أنا
him a
أخرج
message saying
وأضيف
that
أراضي
when the
جديدة
Sultan leaves the
ويسبب أي نوع
land,
من
people's
التنازع.
morals deteriorate.
طبعا بعض
Therefore, it's
المؤرخين
better for me to rule a
يعني
people in
بيدافع عن
peace and
بايزيد فيقول
stability than to leave and
بيقول لا
add
يا
new
جماعة
lands, which
انتبهوا،
would cause a
أنا
kind of
كخليفة ده
conflict. Of
هدخل في
course,
الدولة
some
العثمانية
historians
بأراضي
defend
جديدة.
Yazid, saying,
طبيعة
no, folks,
الدول
pay
أنها
attention.
بعد الفتوح
Muhammad the
الكبرى
Conqueror
يحتاج
brought
إلى
enormous
وقت
lands into the
لهضم
Ottoman state,
هذه
and it's in the
الأراضي.
nature of
يعني
states that
الرأيين
after great
موجودين،
conquests
لكن
they need to pause to
في
digest these
زمانه
lands. So, both
المؤرخين
opinions
عموم المؤرخين
exist,
على إن
but in
بايزيد
his
هو
time,
أضعف شخصية في
historians
عهد
in general
القرون
agree that
العثمانية.
Yazid
هو
was the weakest figure during the era of Ottoman power. He was the one who lost. What else did he have to offer? And with Yazid's apathy, he knew that Andalusia was falling and that pleas for help had reached him. Did something happen? And yet, despite that, he sent a raid, a navy led by Kemal Reis. Yes, the Ottoman Admiral Kemal Reis sent him in ships. These ships arrived and spent 5 years trying to carry out raids on the Spanish coasts and trying to rescue a number of Muslims. I mean, with all this fuss and noise, he didn't abandon Andalusia either. He also sent camel rise there. And these 5 years, from 1487 to 1493, music, he carried out what some historians estimate to be 23 raids on the Spanish coasts and managed to rescue a large number of fleeing Muslims and Muslims with them, because the Jews were also persecuted. I mean, in this matter, anyone who wanted to escape the Inquisition and Spanish persecution could be rescued on these ships and in these naval campaigns. So these raids, but we can say this was practical support. But it wasn't able to change the final course. For this situation, you notice that we are answering. He told you, yes, if there is an attempt, it is an attempt. No, of course, this campaign, this is it. Whoever answers the question or the suspicion, if there was an attempt, then let's go back and say that this attempt couldn't change the general situation in Spain, and let's go back and say that this attempt came from a sultan who was so apathetic and so preoccupied with other internal problems, whether in Anatolia, his relationship with the Mamluks, or his relationship with the Europeans. Okay, we expect that if there had been another figure, and if there hadn't been tensions with the Mamluks in Anatolia, and no internal conflict with Sem, we expect that he could have done more. Yes, okay, but the question here is, the Ottoman state was truly the only state that tried to provide military support to Andalusia. Why didn't the Mamluks move? For example, the Hafsids didn't move, and they also had the Caliph. The Mamluks also had the Caliph, so why didn't they move? They were weak. And perhaps we'll get more details about this when we talk about Selim. And the most the Mamluk Sultan did was send a strongly worded message to the priests of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, sent 2 emissaries to the Pope in Rome to urge him to stop Ferdinand and Isabella from persecuting Muslims. Otherwise, he threatened to destroy the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, expel the Christians from Jerusalem, and persecute the Christians in his kingdom. This was the threat, of course, and it went around until it reached Ferdinand and Isabella. They responded calmly and politely, saying, "We cannot tolerate the land of our ancestors remaining outside our hands. This is our land, and we are liberating it. There is absolutely no persecution of Muslims, and we do not force anyone to convert. Whoever wants to convert is free to do so. Whoever does not want to convert is free." Some accounts mention that they brought him some witnesses from among the Muslims who had converted voluntarily. Did they truly convert voluntarily, or were they forced to give this testimony? Of course, there are Muslims who converted voluntarily. This is something don't rule out the possibility. Someone will come along and tell you, "I converted to Christianity." Of course, and there's no persecution. Even now, in this age of images, you find governments able to respond to human rights reports and tell you, "We don't have any persecutors, we don't have any political prisoners, and all these people are imprisoned within the bounds of the law, and the investigations are fair." And of course, they were reassured and knew that it's not in the nature of Muslims to carry out massacres of Christians or to destroy anything like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. If it weren't for the Mamluk Sultan, I'd believe him. What better answer could I ask for? I don't have the power to do more than that, because the Mamluks at that time couldn't even stop the naval raids on the Mediterranean or Red Sea coasts. We'll come back to that when we talk about Selim. But now, in the context of Andalusia, the Mamluks couldn't accomplish anything, even though the power that did something was the Ottoman Empire. So now look at how the situation has been reversed and the narrative has been distorted. distorted. We are now defending the claim that the Ottomans abandoned Andalusia, while no one raises the same claim that the Mamluks abandoned Andalusia, or that the Hafsids abandoned Andalusia, and so on. Yes, well, now we are talking about the era of Bayezid, the era in which this attempt at raiding occurred. But during the era of Bayezid, we must also remember that we said Granada fell in 1492. From 1499 to 1500, the situation of the Muslims in Granada was stable. There was no persecution until they consolidated their power. Yes, the persecution would begin in 1499-1500, which included decrees restricting Muslims or Year 1500, the Safavid state, during the Ottomans' time, brought up a new issue that preoccupied us. It brought up a new issue that pulled us in from behind. Yes, the Safavid state issue. This issue forced the Ottomans to spend, let's say, at least 30 years preoccupied with this issue, a Safavid state issue. Oh my God, which is the 30 years in which the persecution of the Andalusians began. Why? Because when you have a fire burning inside the house, meaning in Eastern Anatolia, meaning inside Anatolia, in its eastern regions, for example, those 30 years, the Ottoman state was preoccupied with the Safavids. The Spanish hadn't just conquered Granada, they had begun occupying the coasts of Morocco, Algeria, and Tripoli, Libya. So, the situation changed. We're no longer looking to liberate Andalusia or save the Andalusians. We looking for ways to expel the Spanish from Tripoli, which is in Libya. Yes, and from Oran, most Ghanem, Ennabur, and Bijair. Yes, look at the colonizer when he was satisfied with Granada and said, "We've reclaimed our land, so let's start colonizing and working." Yes, and here we must think, or rather, we must remember another thing. When the Spanish took control of Granada, they weren't an ordinary country at that time. They had transformed into a superpower. How can we leave the Ottoman scene for just a moment to illustrate how the Spanish enemy was? At that time, after they conquered Granada, they benefited from Islamic maritime sciences. Columbus came and spoke to them about the possibility of circumnavigating the Cape of Good Hope and reaching the east. Columbus received funding from Ferdinand and Isabella to circumnavigate. On his way to India, he discovered, collided with, and stumbled upon the Americas. He was going to sail under Africa to reach India when he discovered that ships had taken him to the Americas. He found a vast land inhabited by backward peoples. I'm not saying backward in a derogatory way now, but rather that these peoples lacked the military strength to repel him. Their lands were full of fertile soil and riches in gold and silver. You know what I mean. When someone tells you, "I found Ali Barber's treasure," or "I found Ali Barber's cave," during this period, mountains of gold and silver flowed into the Spanish, making them a formidable financial power, and their fleet continued to grow, and then a formidable military force was formed, one that the Ottomans never reached. The Ottomans still had a much stronger land force than a naval force in their army, and then, a little later, about 19 years later, I'm talking about 1500-1519 now. Something else would happen. What would happen? Well, let me take you back a year. We said Ferdinand was the king of Aragon, and Isabella was the queen of Castile. When they married, the two kingdoms united and became known as Spain. They had a daughter named Joanna, a princess, sometimes called Joanna the Mad, sometimes Joanna the Fool. Anyway, whatever happened to
اركنها على جنب.
Joanna, let's leave that aside for now. There was an Italian city, one of those Italian cities like
اسمها
Venice and Naples called
يعني أنا حقيقة نسيت اسمها
Bordes,
بالضبط يعني.
or I've actually
لكن
forgotten the
أميرها هنا،
exact name.
الأمير ده سيصاهر
But
أقوى
its
بيت
prince,
في
this
أوروبا
prince
اللي هو
would marry into the
الهابسبورغ،
most
اللي هم
powerful house in Europe, the
أباطرة
Habsburgs,
الإمبراطورية الرومانية
who were
المقدسة اللي هي
emperors,
قلب الكتلة
the
الأوروبية.
Holy Roman Empire, which is the heart
هذه
of the European
المصاهرة
bloc. This marriage will lead to them having a
أمير إذا لم تخني الذاكرة دلوقتي اسمه فيليب.
prince. If memory serves, his name is Philip. I mean, if I remember correctly, I'm just now getting carried away with his name. I mean, this Philip will marry that crazy Joanna. Yes, that's right. What will this marriage do? It will make Europe almost a single bloc. So, Spain wasn't the Spanish kingdom. Spain now, they will have Joanna and Philip, and they will have Charles V, who is Charles V. Yes, Charles V. He will be the emperor of Europe, except for France and parts of Italy. This is important. So, when the Ottomans were fighting in Belgrade, when they were fighting in Vienna, and when they were fighting in Central Europe, they were fighting Charles V. So, you're talking about a prince now, of course. This Charles V was born in 1500 and took over the throne in 1516 when his father died, and he assumed the rule of the empire, the Holy Roman Empire. When this succession occurred in 1519, he was 19 years old. Europe, Sheikh Murad, at that time was almost unified, except for a few issues like France, the Netherlands, and Italy. These were some problems, and this is the secret behind the good relationship between Suleiman the Magnificent and France. This is where the foreign privileges for the French began, because Suleiman the Magnificent wanted his relationship with France to be strong. Charles Roman VIII, who was the king of France at that time, entered into a rivalry with Charles V, the king of Spain. If I want to summarize it for you, consider France at that time to be to Europe what the Safavids were to us. Even now, the French are taunted that they were the ones who prevented the complete unification of Europe, which could have eliminated the Ottomans. So, the relations between the Ottomans and France were good, and this is the beginning of the foreign privileges. Okay, you need to document this. And sometimes the French and Ottoman armies allied against the Spanish fleet. The enemy that the Ottomans faced was not Spain, was in reality all of Europe. In reality, it was all of Europe, and it wasn't just an ordinary enemy. It was an enemy that the world opened up to, and money and ammunition came to it. Yes, and it circled the Cape of Good Hope and began to occupy the edges of the Islamic world: West Africa, then South Africa, East Africa, South India, and Persia. Or did it begin to establish a state whose foundation was the sea? Yes, so what I mean is, you're not talking about an ordinary confrontation. You're talking about, Suleiman the Magnificent and Shirkin. Consider them the leaders of the world at that time, the two great leaders. Of course, you can imagine if Suleiman the Magnificent hadn't existed, our situation, the situation of the Islamic nation, would have been extremely dire. Of course, because we said the Spanish reached the occupation of Tripoli, they reached the occupation of Tripoli in addition to the occupation of Algeria and Tunisia. They turned into an empire. Frankly, they turned into normal. Yes, so here you have it, sir. 1500. We said 1516. Shirkin took over. 1519. He became emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, all of Europe. Where were the Ottomans then? The Ottomans here are killing the Safavids. The Safavids began to expand and sow discord within Anatolia through a single governor named Shah Kuli, sometimes called Shaitan Kuli. The Ottomans called him Shaitan Kuli. Safavid Shiite movements threatened Qutayr. Bursar and Manasar. You are talking about the heart of the state. This Safavid threat was accompanied by two things. One thing was that Sultan Yazid, who was weak and lukewarm, as we say, was not paying attention to the Safavid danger. One who was most aware of the Safavid danger was his son, Prince Selim, because he was the emir of the Trabzon region, which is close to this place. He sometimes initiated war against them without his father's permission or even his father's approval. Yes, and this caused a new Ottoman civil war to erupt between Sultan Yazid and his son, Prince Selim. Selim tried to seize power from his father and was defeated the first time, and we entered into a battle between brothers. He had one brother named Ahmed and one named Karkord, the mother of this conflict ultimately won. Selim deposed his father, believing his father would ruin the country. His jihadist movements were weak and lukewarm, so he turned against his father and seized power. The two sons, Ahmed and Karkord, with the Mamluks during his father's final days. The Sultan received him at the Al-Gowri market. Subhanallah, glory be to God. So, if you were sitting in the Ottoman Empire now, if you had a local news channel in the Ottoman Empire, you'd see Andalusia, Algeria, and Oran, but you'd only see breaking news: a coup happening here, a war between the brothers Safavids present in Bursar, Hutahir, and Manasar. No one at that time could direct their energy there. Therefore, Selim's energy was limited. Of course, Selim was one of the most active, capable, and, we might say, the strongest of all the Ottoman sultans, but all his efforts were spent consolidating internal rule. He triumphed over his brothers, and in striking down these, the Safavid state expanded into nations, and therefore he had a tremendous victory over the Safavids in the Battle of Chaldean, a victory in which he crushed the armies of Ismail Safavi and entered the Safavid capital, Tabriz. Oh wow! He was surprised, or rather, I don't say surprised, but what made matters worse was that Kansa al-Ghori, the Mamluk ruler in Egypt, allied with the Safavids against Selim. Oh God, an alliance. History, Professor Muhammad, why do you feel like this when we read history? Even when you look at victory or defeat, you feel that victory at a certain point in time was just a hair's breadth away from defeat. If we hadn't been a little patient, we would have triumphed. That's history. And defeat, it was just a hair's breadth away from it, but it didn't happen, and defeat occurred. There's something about Al-Harith. I mean, history. Subhanallah, glory be to God. I mean, my projects. I say my dreams and wishes, because one doesn't control what happens to them, neither today nor tomorrow. If I were to make a series of episodes about steadfastness or resilience, that would be the title. Or, if these people had persevered 2 or 3 days, how would history have changed? And how did history change when those people didn't hold out for 2 or 3 days? This is a very important issue, a recurring one, as clear as the sun. We touched on some aspects of it when we talked about the Crusades and said that Saladin almost conquered all the lands were it not for the prince who came to Tyre and was able to organize its defenses, thus extending the Crusaders' life by 100 years. We said that if Muhammad al-Fatih hadn't stood firm against Constantinople, God knows if we would have returned to it. And we even said, while generally discussing this, that if Murad hadn't been a traitor, the army of Muhammad Roman IV would have been conquered, and history would have been different. We said that if the Grenadines had held out longer, they could have saved all of humanity from the era of the Inquisition and the era of slavery in Africa. And if the Americas had been conquered by the Muslims, history would have been different. God Almighty said, "O you who have believed, when you meet a group in battle, stand firm." So, stand firm and remember God often. In another verse, it says, "O you who have believed, when you meet those who disbelieve, advancing for battle, do not turn your backs to them, or whoever turns his back to them on such a day, unless swerving for battle, meaning a plan of ambush, or joining a group, meaning also part of a plan or ambush, or repeating the attack, has incurred the wrath of God. As for steadfastness and perseverance, in the meaning of Professor Muhammad, before we continue with Salam, I'm afraid I'll lose my mind, but I'll put it this way: it's possible that someone, while we're talking about the events that happened, might tell us, okay, so you're blaming those who are currently in power. Well, the Ottomans had their problems that distracted them from Andalusia. Why are you demanding that our current ones support Gaza when they have their own troubles, their own alliances, and their own problems? I mean, I want to say that's not true. Yes, it's not true. First, look, pray to the Prophet. There isn't a single Islamic state, not Ottoman, not Mamluk, not Abbasid, or anything else that didn't have problems and divisions. They have moments of weakness, and they have things. I don't want to exaggerate, but the comparison between that and what we have now is a huge one. We're telling you, look, he's facing increasing problems and sending ship. Independent parliament, no honest press, not even an independent judiciary. They're sitting there, eating and drinking, meaning they're oppressing everyone and controlling everything, the country's resources and its mamluks. Yet they do nothing. The country doesn't develop or grow into a superpower. They haven't even done anything like the mamluks. And look at the speeches. Sir, you see, they're allied and conspiring against Gaza. No, the difference is enormous. And then, when we're talking about the Ottomans, we say, well, these people, as soon as they woke up, its internal problems were resolved. It expanded and helped, but it was resolved. Its internal problems were resolved and nothing developed. I mean, now, all our Arab countries import weapons. Is there anyone in any of them, and some of the rulers in them, I mean, their families have been stable for 100 years, who developed militarily and became a superpower, who knew how to change the decisions of countries? Absolutely not. No, our situation now is completely miserable.
يقينا لأنه العثمانيين بالفعل لما هدأت معاركهم مع الصفويين واستأنفوا تقدمهم في الغرب.
I mean, let's suppose that if the Safavid state had not appeared, yes, it would have been possible for the Ottomans to offer something to Andalusia. Certainly, because the Ottomans, indeed, when their battles with the Safavids subsided, resumed their advance in the west. I mean, Selim did not rule. Selim only ruled for 8 years. Yes, those 8 years, he did not finish. He eliminated the Safavid threat, and of course the Mamluks who allied with the Safavids, and then he died while preparing for the conquest of Rhodes. Yes, before that, okay, his son Suleiman came. What did Suleiman do? He resumed the conquests in the west. Yes, and when he resumed the conquests in the west, the Safavid threat reappeared and drew him back into battle 2 or 3 times. I want to tell you, when you read even some Western writings, they say, thank God there is a Safavid threat and a Safavid state, because if it weren't for this Safavid state, we would have been finished. The wise ones among them, what were they saying? They were saying, brothers, we must understand what this wise one means. I read this word and I think I'm currently confused about the sources, but I think it's the book History of the Ottoman Turks by Edward Shepherd Creasy. This British diplomat wrote History of the Ottoman Turks, one of the important books. He relied on Hammer's book. Of course, he mentions the Austrian ambassador who, in his diaries, said, brothers, the wars the Ottomans are waging against the Safavids, don't imagine they will lead us to salvation. Thank God they give us peace, they give us some tranquility. These people have a passion for seizing our Ottoman lands. I'll bring you the testimony of our contemporary Austrian diplomat, Yes, so I mean, you want to compare it to the current situation? No, of course not. There's no doubt that the Safavid state drained Muslims of priceless time, effort, money, and lives. By God, the Safavids need a whole episode, but we'll talk about it later, after we finish 100 questions. Yes, of course, the second one's reign was relatively long. Yes, it was about 31 years. 31 years, I mean from to 1512. Yes, and his son Selim was telling him, "What do you mean? My dear father, you need to pull yourself together. The Safavids are going to slaughter us. What are you doing sitting around?" So he was forced to remove him from the government. One of the reasons the army sided with Selim was this military personality. So the important thing is that Selim, in 1510, I'm telling you, he occupied Tripoli before the Spanish. In 1514, Selim was fighting the Safavids. In 1516, Selim entered Syria. In 1517, he entered Egypt. And in 1520, Selim died while preparing to conquer Rhodes. His son Suleiman succeeded him, and Suleiman became the pinnacle of the Ottoman Empire. Professor Muhammad Selim was involved in any attempt to save the coasts of Tunisia and Algeria. Regardless of the official Ottoman fleet, there were mujahideen at sea, sometimes called pirates, part of the naval jihad movement. These were mostly volunteers, driven by zeal. The most famous of these groups were Oras and Kar ad-Din Barbarossa. Piri Rais and Kemal Rais were both loyal to the Ottoman Sultan, but Kemal Rais, before becoming a sultan, was in this case. Yes. What did Selim do? Selim, as we said, or as so, what we'll say is that as the people of Aleppo in the Levant sent him a message asking him to come and save them from the Mamluks, the people of Algeria sent him a message requesting that Algeria come under the authority of the Ottoman Sultanate because of this Spanish threat. Yes, exactly, because of this Spanish threat. So at that time, Selim sent some of these Bahraini Mujahideen. We're talking about the emblem, the flag, and the drums. These are the ceremonies that make this land subject to the Ottoman Sultanate. Of course, these had their jihad in saving the Muslims, yes, in confronting the Spanish ships, or in confronting the ships of Venice and Genoa, or in confronting the ships of the papacy. All of this, we can say, Selim gave them the political cover that leads to that. So, when we come to the attempt, of course, there was an attempt, and this is the part. Now we come to Sultan Suleiman. Sultan Suleiman, we said Selim paved the way for him in the affairs of the Levant. So he began to resume his tours, where, in Morocco, yes, as soon as Suleiman took over, he was able to conquer Belgrade and Rhodes, the two points where his grandfather, named the Conqueror, had stopped. After that, he was able to advance into Hungary and fight the famous Battle of Moharks, the great battle in which the Hungarian army was annihilated, and Ottoman influence extended as far as Budapest. The only remaining target was Vienna, which was a next stage. So you're talking about 1527, the conquest by Belgrade, 1529, or 23, the conquest by Belgrade, if my memory serves me right, was in 927 H. That's why it came up. But 1523, the conquest by Belgrade, 1527, then the Battle of Moharks, then the first siege of Vienna, which was in 1531. Yes. And here is the first campaign in which Suleiman was unable to conquer Vienna, but we must remember that Vienna at that time was part of the Holy Roman Empire, meaning defending it was a defense. The defense was relevant to the situation of Sultan Sharkan V, who was a Holy Roman Emperor at that time. Yes, these are the limits that Suleiman was able to reach. But the great leap that Suleiman made was the development of the Ottoman fleet. Here at this moment, the Ottoman fleet became large, organized, and modernized in order to fight battles in which it could defeat the fleets of Genoa, Venice, the papacy, and later Spain. Or was this a fleet in the Mediterranean? This is a fleet in the Mediterranean. Oh, it's an argument against us, not for us. Oh, he says to you, sir, well, you are far from the mainland. Okay, you will have a strong navy. Good. Why didn't you go and bring it back? Spanish pushed it back like this. And he also imagines that there is a gap between the Ottomans and the Spanish. He imagines that there is a gap, and he imagines that the Spanish are still in Spain. I tell you, the Spanish are now in Morocco and they are in Tripoli. Oh, we are another problem. Yes, we are not going to liberate Andalusia. We are now going to liberate Tripoli. We are going to liberate Tunisia. And we are going to liberate North Africa. Between us and these are the Knights of St. John, who, look at it on the map, you will find that it is holding the mouth of the Mediterranean Sea. I mean, before you enter the strait between the strait and Tunisia, you will find the island of Malta sitting in the middle, and these were supported by the Spanish fleet as well as the fleets of Venice and the Port. So, when you look at the Ottoman battles, where were they located? In the Mediterranean. You find it still in the eastern Mediterranean. For example, the Battle of Lepanto, the first Battle of Lepanto, was fought by Suleiman, and the Ottomans were victorious. Where is Lepanto? It's in Greece. So, you're talking about something I want to say. The person speaking isn't aware of history, the time, or where the Ottomans' power ended and where they fought. But despite that, Suleiman's era is one of the most important eras in which the Ottoman state extended a helping hand to the Andalusians. This was done on 3 levels. The first level is naval support, because at that time we had Horus and Kar ad-Din Barbarossa, and later we had someone named Pal Arli, and before them we had someone named Ishak. There were a number of naval commanders who were present in Tunisia and Algeria, defending these coasts and defeating them. Kar ad-Din Barbarossa had a huge defeat in which he defeated the Spanish Emperor, Charles V. But where did he defeat him? In Algeria. Charles V built a massive naval fleet of 500 ships, intending to eradicate the Ottoman presence from North Africa. After his defeat, some historians recount that he was seen weeping for the first time in his life and throwing his crown into the sea. These are the Ottoman achievements in securing the North African coast. It is estimated that these ships rescued 300,000 Muslims. Memoirs of Kar ad-Din Barbarossa were recently published here in Turkey, translated from Old Turkish by the Algerian professor, Dr. Mohammed Daraj. So, when you read his memoirs, you see that Kar ad-Din Barbarossa's activities were terrifying to the European fleets of that time. Yes, this is the first level, which is the rescue of the Andalusians through naval supplies and military operations against the Spanish coasts. A second level is the political one. The relationship between these Ottomans and the French was amicable, allowing Moriscos to leave Spain for France. Generally, they were treated well and considered subjects of the Ottoman Sultan. Through political relations, France was a safe haven for Andalusians. Of course, politics and internal affairs and the underlying issues had many problems. You know, no matter how strong a state leader's political stance, you can't control the officials. We are refugees in Turkey, and we know the internal problems. So, the Ottomans, in general, through the French and their good relations with the Dutch, orchestrated waves of escape, whether to North Africa, military or political, through their relationship with France, and during more favorable times through their relationship with Italy, until these people reached the Ottoman state. Therefore, there was a large Morisco community in the Ottoman state. Yes, and this large Morisco community tried to support the Moriscos politically and financially through their presence in Istanbul and their connection to the Suez Canal. Those present here in Constantinople, if we were to look today, we would find people of Morisco origin. Absolutely, absolutely, they are located in Istanbul, and as I mentioned, anyone who wants to delve deeper into what I'm saying should refer to the studies of Dr. Abdul Jalal al-Tamimi on this topic, and to Morisco studies in general. I believe there is a book, but I haven't actually read it to Fathi Zadrat's book, The Ottomans and Their Role in Saving Andalusia. I imagine it's a separate book on this subject. However, I've read at least two of Abdul Jalal al-Tamimi's books, The Ottomans and the Issue of the New Morisco Studies and translations from Spanish and French. The level is very important. I mentioned the political level and the military level. Among the things I've read is that Suleiman the Magnificent transported some Moriscos, or a significant portion of them, from the coasts of Spain to North Africa. Yes, he was among those he transported. He also transported Jews, of course, and these Jews were the ones who came to Salonika. They ended up in Salonika, and they ended up in Dalmabars. This is one of the virtues of the Muslims. Yes, by the way, this is a historical fact acknowledged by Jewish historians. They later abandoned the Ottoman Empire. Look, I remember when I was telling you that aware, suspicion is sometimes a matter of ideology. We have a religion, so no matter how much we tolerate things, and even if that tolerance backfires, we can't say we were wrong for being tolerant. Yes, because we have a religion. And in the end, and I'll say it again, to be fair, not all Jews were enemies of the Ottoman state. Many Jews served the Ottoman state faithfully, but when circumstances changed and Zionism emerged, and there were colonial projects, then this kind of thing came along. Of course, the statement that Professor Mohammed mentioned was in the context of clarification and answering the question. Don't let anyone take it out of context and post it on social media and say, yes, Professor Mohammed, he told some Jews that they would let them cut it now. If they cut it, we'll erase it. Don't worry. Okay, so anyway, so Suleiman the Magnificent, meaning he remained for a long time. This was to the point that, when you read the manuscripts of the Moriscos had high hopes based on the Ottomans. They expected the Ottoman Sultan to come and save them, and they expected the Ottoman army to come and save them. This means there is torque, some of which I recorded in the first volume of the book In the Corridors of History. I refer back to the saying, meaning the advice. For example, the book by Louis Cardillac, the French Orientalist, called The Moriscos and the Christians the Confrontational Debate. This is taken from the Inquisition, from the documents of the Inquisition. So the Ottomans were present in the dreams of the Andalusians, that the time was near for the Ottomans to save them, even Sheikh Murad, even until the end of this time. I mean, Philip Roman III, who issued the decree to expel the Andalusians. Why did he issue the decree to expel them? What was he planning? Was he planning to exterminate them? Wasn't he planning to? He expelled them, but he feared that they would be exterminated by an Ottoman-Moroccan Sardi alliance. The Netherlands was Protestant. So, to avoid extermination, he issued the expulsion decree in 1609. Among the documents published by Dr. Abdul Jalal al-Tamimi in his book is a document from Sultan Ahmed to the Queen of France at that time. The Queen of France was a young boy named Louis, whose mother was his guardian, and to Italy. This document proves the Ottomans' concern and care for the fate of the Andalusians. They had constant reports stating that they were subjected to theft, violence at sea, or being sold into slavery after having been merchants. It contains precise details regarding the issue of Morisco being forced to wear merchant clothes. This should not be considered a form of deception, but rather an expulsion. There were exchanges of letters, and the French ambassador in Constantinople at that time was sympathetic to this situation because he wanted to strengthen Ottoman-French relations. The last moment, up until 1609, the Ottomans were following up through letters with kings and princes to ensure the safe passage of the Moriscos until they reached Ottoman lands or the Islamic countries in East Africa and North Africa. So any talk about the Ottomans not listing a finger towards the Andalusians is nonsense, utter nonsense. I mean, it's just talk, and I tell you, it's strange and ironic that most of those who say this justify their current rulers' inaction regarding Gaza, saying they didn't consult us before. Yes, Professor Mohammed, if we wanted to summarize the reasons for the failure to rescue or assist Andalusia and its people and consolidate their rule, we could summarize them in three general points: the story of the unpreparedness of the naval fleet or the lack of naval expansion, the failure to achieve the unification of the East, yes, for example, and the lack of alliances with Morocco or North Africa or the countries that existed at that time. No, the third one needs more detail, my friend Abu al-Haris. If you'd let me summarize it, I'd say firstly that the internal Ottoman circumstances at the time of the fall of Andalusia were unfavorable, filled with civil wars and internal conflicts, whether with the Safavids, the Mamluks, or other internal disputes. Secondly, the Ottoman land and sea forces couldn't reach Andalusia. Despite this, the Ottoman state never ceased its attempts to save Andalusia and the Andalusians, whether through military or political support. So, this answer can be summarized in 3 points. Yes. From Muhammad al-Fatih to Ahmed I, the intention to help was present and active. The intention and the actions were both present. Okay, Professor Mohammed, that's a sufficient, clear, and comprehensive answer. And I think now, when something comes up about the Ottomans, or this issue is raised on social media, there's no need to bring up this line, which implies that the Ottomans let Andalusia fall and went on with their lives. There's no need. May God reward you, Professor. Mohammed Ali presented what he said. As for you, my brothers, wherever you are, don't forget to share this episode with your brothers, friends, and loved ones so that goodness and benefit may spread to everyone. Professor Mohammed has also prepared an important question for you in the next episode, one of the most important questions on this topic. I hope you will wait for it, follow it, and share what Professor Mohammed will answer, God willing. Until then, may God protect you. Until we meet again to watch more programs about Islamic history and to learn about its events, victories, defeats, leaders, scholars, secrets, governance, politics, wars, and battles, all you have to do is follow our YouTube channel, Our History. Our history stretches from the farthest point in the past to the farthest